Dominic Connor sacrificed his dreams for 4 years to put his girlfriend, Jessica Thornton, through medical school. The day she graduated, she left him for a successful surgeon, dismissing Dominic's ambition as mediocrity. Fueled by a pure rage and devastation, Dominic poured his pain into building MediLink, an AI-driven healthcare app he'd previously shelved. This is the story of his meteoric 3-year rise from a broke, heartbroken software developer to the founder of a billion-dollar company. The Startup Sacrifice: Heartbreak, Hustle, and a billion-dollar redemption. Part 1. The Foundation. The apartment smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, a scent Dominic Connor had grown intimately familiar with over the past 4 years. He sat hunched over his laptop at 2 a.m., the blue light casting shadows across his gaunt face, making him look older than his 28 years. The spreadsheet before him told a story he'd read too many times. Negative $342 in checking, student loan payment due in 6 days, and Jessica's final semester tuition looming like a guillotine blade. In the bedroom, Jessica Thornton slept peacefully, her breathing soft and rhythmic. She had an exam in the morning, pharmacology, she'd said, and needed her rest. She always needed her rest. Dominic had learned to measure his life in the spaces between her needs. The quiet hours when she studied, the empty afternoons when she attended lectures, the hollow evenings when she was too exhausted to talk. He closed the banking app and opened the folder he'd labeled Someday. Inside were 47 documents: business plans, market research, user interface mock-ups, and investor pitch decks for MediLink, the healthcare app he'd been developing in stolen moments for the past 3 years. The idea was elegant in its simplicity: a platform that connected patients with specialists, integrated medical records, and used AI to predict potential drug interactions and suggest preventative care protocols. He'd shown it to a venture capitalist once, 2 years ago, who'd called it revolutionary and offered seed funding. Dominic had turned it down. Jessica had been starting her 2nd year, and the medical school's financial aid had fallen through. The choice had been simple then: his dream or her future. Love meant sacrifice, he told himself. Love meant being the foundation while she built herself up. Now, as dawn bled gray light through their threadbare curtains, that choice felt like a scar that wouldn't heal. "Dom, you coming to bed?" Jessica's voice drifted from the bedroom, thick with sleep. "Yeah, just finishing up some work," he called back, closing his laptop. Work meant his job as a senior developer at a mid-sized tech firm, good enough to pay the bills, soul-crushing enough to make every day feel like drowning. He'd started there as a temporary measure, just until Jessica finished her 1st year. Then it became just until she finished her clinicals, just until she graduated. The goalposts kept moving, and Dominic kept running. He crawled into bed beside her, and she instinctively curled against him, her hand resting on his chest. In sleep, she seemed like the girl he'd fallen in love with 5 years ago, the bright-eyed pre-med student who'd talked about opening a free clinic in underserved communities, who'd kissed him in the rain after their 3rd date and whispered that she'd never met anyone who believed in her the way he did. "I love you," he whispered into her hair, the words automatic as breathing. She didn't respond. She was already asleep. Part 2. The Graduation. The auditorium buzzed with champagne-fueled celebration, filled with families who'd flown in from around the country, fathers with expensive cameras, mothers dabbing at tears with monogrammed handkerchiefs. Dominic stood at the edge of the crowd, in his only suit, bought second-hand for job interviews he'd stopped going to, holding a bouquet of grocery store roses he couldn't afford. He'd watched Jessica cross the stage an hour ago, her smile radiant as she accepted her medical degree. She'd looked so beautiful in her white coat, so accomplished. In that moment, every sacrifice had felt worth it. Every abandoned dream, every declined opportunity, every night spent eating ramen while she ordered takeout from the nice Thai place, all of it had been in service of this triumph. "There he is, my rock!" Jessica appeared through the crowd, her arm linked with a tall man in an immaculate navy suit. The man had silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of confident smile that came from never having worried about money. Dr. Marcus Holloway, this is Dominic Connor, my boyfriend. Dom, this is Dr. Holloway. He's the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Metropolitan General. The famous Dominic. Marcus extended his hand, his grip firm and appraising. Jessica's told me so much about you. You've been quite the supportive partner. She's worth it, Dominic said, handing Jessica the roses. She took them with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. How sweet. Thank you, honey. She turned back to Marcus. Dom's been helping me through school. He's in... what is it you do again? Something with computers? The casual dismissal hit like a slap. 4 years of sacrifice reduced to something with computers. Software development, Dominic said quietly. Right. Anyway, Dr. Holloway was just telling me about an incredible opportunity. Metropolitan General is starting a new cardiology fellowship program, and he thinks I'd be perfect for it. That's amazing, Jess. Dominic tried to inject enthusiasm into his voice.
When does it start? That's the thing. I need to decide soon. It's extremely competitive. She exchanged a glance with Marcus that Dominic couldn't quite read. Dr. Holloway has offered to mentor me personally. Please, call me Marcus. The older doctor's hand lingered on Jessica's shoulder. And I should circulate. Congratulations again, Dr. Thornton. We'll talk more about your future. As Marcus disappeared into the crowd, Dominic reached for Jessica's hand. Dr. Thornton has a nice ring to it. She pulled away, adjusting her white coat. Dom, we need to talk. Those 4 words, the beginning of every ending. Okay, his mouth went dry. What's wrong? Let's not do this here. She glanced around at the celebrating crowd. Let's go outside. The courtyard was quieter, populated only by small clusters of families taking photographs. Jessica led him to a stone bench beneath a budding maple tree, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. I've been thinking a lot about my future, Jessica began, her voice carefully modulated, as if she'd rehearsed this. About where I want to be in 5 years, 10 years, the kind of life I want to build. We've talked about this, Dominic said, his chest tightening. You want to specialize, maybe start a practice? I'm not talking about medicine, Dom. I'm talking about everything else, my entire life. She took a breath. This isn't working anymore. The world seemed to tilt. What isn't working? Us. This relationship. I need to be honest with you. I've been feeling this way for a while. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with adoration, were now cool and distant. You've been wonderful, truly, but I'm moving into a different phase of my life now. I need a partner who's at the same level, professionally and financially. Someone with ambition. Ambition? The word came out strangled. Jessica, I've worked 60-hour weeks for 4 years to put you through medical school. I gave up. And I'm grateful, I am. But that's just it. You gave up. You had ideas, I guess, but you never pursued them. You settled for mediocrity. She stood, smoothing her white coat. I'm going to be a doctor at one of the best hospitals in the country. I'll be attending galas, networking with department heads and pharmaceutical executives. Can you honestly see yourself in that world? In your off-the-rack suits, making small talk about software updates? Each word was a knife, precisely placed. I sacrificed for us. No, you sacrificed because you didn't have the drive to do anything else. Ambition means taking risks, fighting for what you want. You just existed. You were comfortable being my safety net, but I don't need safety nets anymore. She checked her watch, a Cartier he'd never seen before. Marcus is taking me to dinner with the fellowship board.
I'm going to need you to move your things out of the apartment by the end of the week. Marcus? The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. How long? Don't be dramatic. He's a mentor. How long? 3 months. She said it defiantly, without shame. He understands what it takes to be at the top. He has a house in the Hamptons, Dom. He's on the board of directors for 2 hospitals. He has a Ferrari and a boat, and he knows the mayor personally. That's the kind of man I deserve. Dominic stood, his legs unsteady. I loved you. I gave you everything. You gave me what you could, and what you could give wasn't enough. Jessica's expression shifted to something almost pitying. Maybe this will be good for you too. Maybe you'll finally find some ambition of your own, instead of living vicariously through mine. She walked away without looking back, her white coat billowing in the spring breeze, leaving Dominic alone with wilting roses and the ruins of 4 years. He sat on that bench until the sun set and the courtyard emptied. He sat until a janitor asked if he was okay. He sat until the question of whether he was okay seemed so absurd that he started laughing, a harsh sound that startled pigeons from the maple tree. Then he went home to pack his life into boxes. Part 3. The Resurrection. The studio apartment Dominic could afford was in a neighborhood real estate agents euphemistically called up and coming. The walls were thin enough to hear his neighbors' arguments, the radiator clanked like a dying machine, and water pressure was a theoretical concept. He'd moved in with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and a rage so pure it felt like fuel. For 3 days he didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't shower. He opened the Someday folder and began to build. MediLink consumed him. He coded until his vision blurred, until his fingers cramped, until the lines between day and night dissolved into a continuous stream of problems to solve. The app he'd envisioned in stolen moments for 3 years began to take concrete form. He'd poured his grief and fury into every line of code, every user interface decision, every algorithm. On the 4th day, he called Rachel Kim, his former colleague who'd left their company to join a venture capital firm. "Dominic," she sounded surprised, "I haven't heard from you in years. I need a meeting," he interrupted. "I have something to show you. Listen, if this is about a job, the timing isn't great. It's not about a job. It's about a healthcare app that's going to revolutionize patient care and make someone very rich. I need 2 hours of your time and access to your partners." There was a pause. "You sound different." "I am different. Come in tomorrow, 10 a.m. And Dominic, this better be good." It was better than good.
It was brilliant. In Rachel's glass-walled conference room, Dominic presented MediLink to 6 partners with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. He'd lost weight, his eyes were hollow, and his passion bordered on manic, but the product spoke for itself. MediLink solved problems the healthcare industry didn't know could be solved. The AI didn't just predict drug interactions, it learned from outcomes, continuously improving its recommendations. The specialist matching algorithm considered not just credentials, but treatment philosophies, patient personality profiles, and even geographic accessibility. The integrated record system used blockchain for security and could communicate seamlessly with existing hospital infrastructure. "You built this alone?" one partner asked, scrolling through the demo on his tablet. "Yes." "In 4 days?" "I've been building it in my head for 3 years. The last 4 days I just put it on screen." Dominic's voice was steady despite the adrenaline. "I have working prototypes, beta testers lined up, and interest from 3 hospital systems. What I need is capital to scale, hire a team, and bring this to market before someone else does." Rachel leaned forward. "What are you asking for?" $2 million in seed funding. I'm offering 15% equity." Another partner whistled. "That's a gutsy valuation for a solo developer with a prototype." "It's not a valuation. It's a prediction." Dominic met each of their eyes in turn. "In 5 years, MediLink will be the standard healthcare management platform in the United States. In 10 years, we'll be global. You can get in now at 15%, or you can read about me in Forbes and wonder why you said no." They funded him for $3 million at 12% equity. Part 4. The Ascension. Building a company was like raising a child in Fast Forward, exhausting, terrifying, and punctuated by small miracles that made the suffering worthwhile. Dominic hired carefully, a brilliant COO who'd sold her last startup for 8 figures, a chief medical officer who understood both technology and hospital politics, developers who shared his obsession with elegant solutions.
"I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.
The first year was harsh. Launch delays, a cybersecurity scare, a competitor trying to poach his entire engineering team. Dominic slept in the office more nights than not, showering at a nearby gym, eating meals at his desk. He aged years in months, his hair developing gray streaks, permanent shadows taking residence beneath his eyes. But MediLink worked. More than worked, it transformed. Hospital systems that adopted the platform reported 30% reductions in adverse drug events, 25% improvements in specialist referral satisfaction, and significant cost savings from reduced duplicated tests. Patients loved the interface. Doctors praised the AI's accuracy. Insurance companies, despite themselves, appreciated the efficiency. Media attention followed. First, local tech blogs, then national healthcare publications, then Bloomberg, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. Dominic gave interviews in which he carefully avoided mentioning Jessica, referring only to personal challenges that had inspired his focus. He never said her name, but she haunted every success. With each milestone, the first $1 million in revenue, the 10th hospital system onboarded, the 15th employee hired, he wondered if she knew, if she'd heard, if she cared. Year 2 brought Series A funding, $40 million at a $300 million valuation. Dominic owned 64% of a company suddenly worth a fortune. On paper, he was wealthy. In reality, he was hollow. His apartment remained sparse. He bought better clothes for investor meetings, but felt like an imposter in them. Money, he discovered, couldn't fill the void Jessica had left. Success tasted like ash when there was no one to share it with. You need to live a little, Rachel told him over coffee one morning, 2 years into MediLink's existence. When's the last time you went on a date, took a vacation, did anything that wasn't work? I'm fine. You're a zombie. A successful zombie, granted, but still. She stirred her latte thoughtfully. You've proved your point, Dom. The company's thriving. Maybe it's time to figure out what comes next on a personal level. What came next arrived in the form of Forbes magazine, Year 3. Part 5, The Feature. The photographer wanted Dominic in front of a green screen, overlaid with images of the app interface. The journalist, a sharp woman named Claire Morrison, had spent 2 days following him around, observing meetings, interviewing employees, and asking increasingly probing questions about his motivation. Most founders have an origin story, Claire said during their final interview, her recorder sitting between them at a coffee shop 3 blocks from MediLink's sleek downtown offices. The problem they witnessed that sparked the solution. What was yours? Dominic considered lying. Considered the sanitized version he'd been telling investors and media for 3 years. Considered maintaining the careful wall between his professional triumph and personal devastation. Someone I loved made me feel worthless, he said instead. She left me the day she graduated medical school I'd paid for by abandoning my own dreams. She told me I lacked ambition, that I'd settled for mediocrity. He smiled without humor. I built MediLink to prove her wrong. Claire's pen stilled. Did you? I built a $100 million company. I've transformed healthcare delivery for 300,000 patients. I've created jobs, value, and something meaningful. He paused. But every time I hit a milestone, I still hear her voice telling me I wasn't enough. So, I don't know. You tell me. Did I prove her wrong? Or did I let her turn me into someone who measures worth in valuations and user metrics? The article ran 6 weeks later with a cover photo of Dominic in front of a wall-sized screen showing MediLink's interface, his expression determined and distant. The headline read, "The Heartbreak App, How Personal Devastation Fueled Healthcare's Hottest Startup." Claire had written a nuanced piece exploring the relationship between pain and innovation, featuring interviews with his team, testimonials from doctors using the platform, and data on MediLink's impact. But she'd also included Dominic's origin story, his motivation, his admission that success hadn't healed him. The article made him human in a way press releases never could. It also made him visible.
Part 6. The Fall. Jessica Thornton Holloway had not thought about Dominic Connor in months. Between her fellowship, her marriage to Marcus, and the demanding social calendar of a doctor's wife, her past relationship had faded to an occasionally uncomfortable memory, like a photograph from an unflattering angle. She'd married Marcus 14 months after graduating, a tasteful ceremony at the Metropolitan Club, followed by a honeymoon in Santorini. Life had unfolded exactly as she'd envisioned. A beautiful brownstone in the right neighborhood, charity galas, networking dinners, and the subtle power that came from being married to one of the city's most prominent surgeons. The fellowship had been challenging. Marcus had been right about that. The hours were grueling, the attending physicians demanding, the pressure immense. But she'd persevered, motivated by the vision of herself as Dr. Jessica Thornton Holloway, cardiologist, partner at a prestigious practice, wife of Dr. Marcus Holloway. The vision had started cracking 6 months ago. First, there was Mrs. Patterson, the 72-year-old woman with atrial fibrillation whom Jessica had prescribed a medication combination without checking for interactions. The patient had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke, survived, and filed a complaint. The hospital's review board had called it an unfortunate oversight. Then there was the misdiagnosed acute coronary syndrome she'd attributed to anxiety, sending a 49-year-old man home who'd returned to the ER 3 hours later with a massive heart attack. He'd lived, but his heart function was permanently compromised. The lawsuit was ongoing. The cases piled up, not malicious errors, but careless ones, overlooked details, skipped steps. The kind of mistakes that came from rushing, from being more concerned with appearances than accuracy, from never developing the careful, methodical mindset that separated good doctors from great ones. "You're not focused," Marcus had told her after the 4th incident review in as many months. They were in his home office, him behind his mahogany desk, her standing like a student called to the principal. "Medicine requires absolute precision. What's going on with you?" "I'm trying my best." "Your best isn't good enough." His tone was cold, clinical. "I went out on a limb recommending you for this fellowship, Jessica. You're making me look bad." The hospital had terminated her fellowship 3 weeks ago. "Not a good fit for our program," the director had said, his expression pitying. Jessica had heard the truth beneath the euphemism. "You're not good enough." She'd been too ashamed to tell Marcus immediately. Instead, she'd spent her days at coffee shops and libraries, applying for positions at other hospitals, crafting cover letters that tried to explain away the pattern of negligence now attached to her record. When she finally confessed, Marcus had been silent for a long moment. "I see," he said finally. "I think we both know this marriage was predicated on certain expectations about your career trajectory." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I married Dr. Jessica Thornton Holloway, rising star in cardiology, not Jessica, the unemployed doctor with a negligence record." He'd poured himself scotch, not offering her any. "I have a reputation to maintain. I can't be associated with this." "This? You mean your wife?" Her voice had risen, panic creeping in. "Marcus, I made mistakes, but I can fix this. I can improve." "You're 33, Jessica. If you were going to be a competent physician, you would be by now." He'd said it matter-of-factly, as if commenting on the weather. "I've also been meaning to talk to you about something else. I've met someone. Her name is Alicia. She's a pharmaceutical rep, 26, brilliant, and she has her life together. She makes me feel young." The divorce papers had arrived 2 days later. Now, sitting in her sister's guest room, the brownstone had been Marcus's before the marriage, Jessica scrolled numbly through her phone, looking at job listings for which she was overqualified and under-credentialed simultaneously. An alert popped up from a news aggregator. Forbes features healthcare innovator Dominic Connor. Her heart stopped. The name alone was enough to make her hands shake, but it was the accompanying photo that made her breath catch. Dominic, older and harder than she remembered, staring at the camera with an intensity that seemed to see through the screen. The headline promised a story about a groundbreaking healthcare app and the heartbreak that inspired it. With trembling fingers, she opened the article. Part 7, The Reckoning. Jessica read the Forbes article 3 times.
each pass revealing new layers of her own cruelty reflected back at her. The someone I loved was obviously her. The medical school he'd funded, her medical school. The accusations of lacking ambition, settling for mediocrity, her words, preserved in print like evidence at a trial. The article detailed MediLink's meteoric rise, $100 million valuation, partnerships with 50 hospital systems, 300 employees, predictions of $1 billion company within 5 years. Dominic had been featured in additional outlets. TechCrunch called him healthcare's quiet revolutionary. Bloomberg labeled him the most important founder you've never heard of. There were photos of him at conferences, at his company's modern offices, standing in front of the MediLink logo. In none of them did he smile. He looked successful, powerful, and profoundly unhappy. Claire Morrison's prose was elegant and cutting. Connor's success seems to have come at a personal cost. When asked about relationships, he deflects. His employees describe him as brilliant but isolated, a man who lives at the office and treats building a company like an act of vengeance rather than creation. One wonders if proving yourself to someone who left is a victory or just a different kind of prison. Jessica set down her phone and stared at her sister's ceiling. The universe had a sick sense of irony. She'd left Dominic because he lacked ambition, and he'd built an empire. She'd pursued medicine with singular focus, and she'd failed spectacularly. She'd married Marcus for his success, and he'd discarded her for someone younger and prettier. Every decision she'd made in service of becoming someone important had led her here. 33, divorced, unemployed, with a professional record that made her nearly unemployable. Meanwhile, Dominic Connor, the man she'd dismissed as mediocre, as someone who'd settled, was on the cover of Forbes. The urge to reach out to him came suddenly and overwhelmingly. She imagined calling, emailing, showing up at MediLink's offices. She imagined apologizing, explaining that she'd been young and stupid and focused on the wrong things. She imagined asking if, maybe, considering their history. The fantasy dissolved as quickly as it formed. What could she possibly say? Sorry I destroyed you, but I'm destroyed now too, so maybe we could be destroyed together? The hubris was staggering even by her standards. Her phone buzzed, a rejection email from another hospital. She'd applied to 17 positions in the past 3 weeks and received 14 rejections.
The remaining 3 hadn't bothered to respond. Jessica had spent her entire adult life building toward a vision of herself, successful, respected, married to power, enviable. She'd made every decision with that vision in mind, sacrificing kindness for ambition, love for status, character for credentials. The vision had been a mirage. She thought about Dominic sitting alone at 2 a.m., sacrificing his dreams to fund hers. She thought about the grocery store roses she'd accepted dismissively. She thought about his face when she'd told him he lacked ambition, the way something had broken behind his eyes. She'd taken a good man's love and weaponized it against him. She'd extracted everything he had to give and left him empty. And when he'd had nothing left to take, she'd blamed him for being depleted. The worst part was that she couldn't even blame youth or naivety. She'd been 28 when they met, 32 when she left him. She'd known exactly what she was doing. She'd simply believed she deserved better than someone who loved her unconditionally. Now she understood. Unconditional love was the rarest thing in the world, and she'd thrown it away for a Cartier watch and a brownstone. Part 8. The Continuation. Dominic saw Jessica's LinkedIn request 3 months after the Forbes article published. He was in his corner office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that cost more than his first car, abstract art he'd bought because his decorator said it conveyed innovation. The trappings of success that felt like elaborate set design. Jessica Thornton Holloway had tried to connect with him on LinkedIn. No message, just the request. He clicked on her profile.
The photo showed her in scrubs, smiling at the camera with the professional warmth of someone who'd practiced the expression. Her credentials listed the Metropolitan General Fellowship with no end date, as if she were still enrolled. Her summary talked about passionate patient care and commitment to cardiology excellence. A quick Google search revealed the truth behind the carefully curated profile. Medical board complaints, lawsuit filings, and a hospital statement about mutually agreeing to part ways with a fellow. The digital trail of a career imploding. He should have felt vindicated. This was the moment he'd fantasized about during those first harsh months. Jessica failing, recognizing her mistake, understanding what she'd lost. Karma's perfect symmetry. Instead, he felt hollow. Dominic declined the connection request without responding. Then he closed LinkedIn and stared out at the city. The Forbes article had been both a triumph and a curse. His public confession had made him famous, but also vulnerable. He received messages constantly now, from ex-girlfriends, former colleagues, aspiring entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists.
Everyone wanted something, a piece of his success, his time, his story, his money. What no one wanted was just him. Dominic, without the company, without the valuation, without the narrative. The person he'd been at 2 a.m. in a shitty apartment, dreaming in code, had been consumed by the founder he'd become. You should date, Rachel had told him again last week, more insistently this time. The company's stable. You have a great executive team. You're still young, Dom. Don't let her take more than she already has. But how could he date when every potential partner existed in Jessica's shadow? When he found himself measuring every woman against his own devastation? When success had made him desirable for all the wrong reasons? The irony wasn't lost on him. Jessica had left him for being unambitious, and his ambition had made him undateable. He'd become exactly the kind of person he'd despised in Marcus Holloway, defined by professional achievement, emotionally unavailable, unable to separate his worth from his work. He'd built MediLink as an act of defiance, and in doing so, he'd built his own prison. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Connor, the Series B investors are here." Dominic straightened his tie, Italian silk, absurdly expensive, and walked to the conference room. Another meeting, another pitch, another step up a ladder that seemed to extend infinitely upward with no destination. Part 9. The Reflection. Late that night, alone in his apartment, he'd upgraded to a penthouse but still barely furnished it. Dominic opened his laptop and created a new document. He titled it, "What Comes Next?" and stared at the blank page. For 3 years, he'd had singular focus: build MediLink, prove Jessica wrong, become undeniably successful. He'd achieved all three. The company was thriving, Jessica had self-destructed, and he'd made more money than he'd ever imagined. So why did he feel like he'd lost? He thought about the man he'd been before Jessica left. Optimistic, in love, content to sacrifice because sacrifice felt meaningful. That version of himself seemed impossibly naive now, almost pathetic in its earnest devotion. But he thought too about the man he'd become. Hard, driven, isolated. He'd turned himself into a machine, optimized for one function: success. In the process, he'd optimized away everything that made life worth living. Claire Morrison's question echoed in his mind. Did I prove her wrong, or did I let her turn me into someone who measures worth in valuations and user metrics? The answer was both. He'd proved that Jessica had been wrong about his capabilities, his ambition, his potential. But he'd also let her judgment become his entire identity. He'd let her cruelty turn him cruel, not to others, but to himself, to the possibility of happiness, to any future not defined by retaliation. Jessica had been wrong about him, but maybe he'd been wrong about himself too. He'd thought the pain of her rejection was the problem, that success was the solution. Now he understood. The pain had been a symptom, and success was just a different anesthetic. The real problem was that he'd built his entire sense of self on someone else's opinion. First on Jessica's love, then on disproving her contempt. Either way, she'd been the center of his universe. Even now, with her career destroyed and his ascendant, she still had power over him. That had to stop.
Dominic began to type. He wrote about the man he wanted to become, someone who created value because it mattered, not because he had something to prove. Someone who could be alone without being lonely. Someone who measured success in impact rather than valuation, in relationships rather than transactions. He wrote about forgiveness, not for Jessica, but for himself. For the years he'd sacrificed, for the bitterness he'd cultivated, for the emotional walls he'd built so high that nothing could get through. He wrote until dawn, and when he finished, he felt lighter than he had in years. Epilogue. Forward. 6 months later, Dominic stepped down as CEO of MediLink. He remained chairman of the board and majority shareholder, but he promoted his brilliant COO to lead the company's day-to-day operations. The decision shocked everyone except Rachel, who'd seen it coming. "What will you do?" she asked over coffee, in the same shop where they'd planned the company's future years ago. "Live," Dominic said simply. "Travel. Read books that aren't about business. Maybe start a foundation focused on healthcare access in underserved communities." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Maybe even date, though I make no promises." "What about Jessica? What about her?" "She's been trying to reach you, did you know?" "I know." Dominic had blocked her number after the 15th call, deleted the emails without reading them. "But she's not my responsibility anymore. Maybe she never was. Not the way I thought." "That's very mature of you." "Mature or just tired?" He sipped his coffee. "I spent years of my life trying to prove something to someone who didn't matter. I don't want to spend more years proving I'm over it. I want to just be over it." Rachel raised her cup in a toast. "To being over it." "To being over it," Dominic echoed. He meant it. 2 years after the Forbes article, MediLink went public at a $2 billion valuation. Dominic's shares were worth $600 million. He gave away half of it to medical school scholarship funds, free clinics, healthcare access initiatives in developing countries. He bought a modest house by the ocean and spent his mornings swimming, his afternoons reading, his evenings with friends he'd neglected during his obsessive building years. He dated, cautiously. Some relationships lasted weeks, others months. He learned to be alone without drowning in it, to enjoy his own company, to find peace in the quiet spaces he'd once filled with work. He never saw Jessica again. He heard, through mutual acquaintances, that she'd eventually found work at a small community clinic, doing primary care instead of cardiology. That she'd entered therapy, confronted her own demons, tried to become someone better than she'd been. He hoped it was true. He hoped she found peace. But mostly, he didn't think about her at all. On the 3rd anniversary of MediLink's founding, Dominic stood on his back deck watching the sunset paint the ocean gold and crimson. His phone buzzed, another Forbes notification, another list he'd made, another validation he no longer needed. He silenced the notification and went inside to make dinner. The man who'd measured his worth in someone else's opinion was gone. In his place was someone simpler, quieter, and infinitely freer. Just Dominic, building a life worth living. The end.
I love making these videos for you. If you liked this story, then please like, subscribe to my channel, and switch on the notifications for more entertaining stories. Please also leave a comment for any story suggestions.